It is a lifeline in a bottle. For decades, the global pharmaceutical supply chain has operated like a quiet miracle, a complex web connecting the world to deliver life-saving medicine, a system built on trust and cooperation. Then, with a single threat, one man tried to weaponize that trust, a 200% tariff gamble designed to bring allies to their knees. But it backfired instantly, triggering a bold, coordinated rebellion that left the White House isolated and American patients in the crosshairs. How did a political bluff become a global healthcare crisis? To understand the shock of this confrontation, you must first appreciate the miracle it threatened. The modern pharmaceutical system is one of humanity's most complex achievements. It's a truly global endeavor. A breakthrough drug might be discovered in a lab in California using active pharmaceutical ingredients or APIs from China or Italy, manufactured in a state-of-the-art facility in Ireland and dispensed at a pharmacy in Ohio. This intricate dance of global logistics and scientific collaboration made life-saving medicines more accessible and affordable than ever before. It was a system predicated on open borders and stable trade relationships, especially among close allies like the US, Canada, and Australia. But the tremors of instability began long before the 200% tariff threat. Throughout his first term, President Trump's willingness to use tariffs as a blunt instrument against both adversaries and allies alike created a new era of unpredictability. The America First doctrine signaled that no trade relationship was sacred. For nations like Canada and Australia, who rely on this globalized system for the health of their citizens, this was a flashing red light. According to OECD data, nearly 70% of the drugs dispensed in Canada are imported. They watched as the U.S. weaponized trade in other sectors and began to quietly prepare for the day that hostility might target the one area they couldn't afford to compromise on: their people's health. This wasn't paranoia, it was prudent planning. They began building what would become a playbook for resisting American economic pressure. The political bombshell dropped like a declaration of war on the global healthcare system. In a move designed for maximum shock value, President Trump threatened a staggering 200% tariff on all finished pharmaceutical products imported into the United States. The scale was immense. The target was $212.7 billion worth of goods, a figure that exceeds what all Americans spend on broadband, movie tickets, and sporting events combined. The hit list wasn't abstract. It included the everyday, life-sustaining medicines millions depend on: insulin for diabetics, critical heart medications, and pediatric antibiotics. The stated goal was a familiar populist promise: to force pharmaceutical companies to abandon their global supply chains and bring manufacturing jobs back to American soil. It was a simple, powerful message for a deeply complex reality. But the entire premise of the threat was built on a fundamental misunderstanding of how the industry actually works. It was a bluff based on a fatal structural flaw. The White House seemed to believe you can move a multi-billion-dollar biologics plant the way you move a car factory. You can't. Today, only 28% of the manufacturing plants for active pharmaceutical ingredients, the core components of medicine, are located on U.S. soil. The rest are in places like Ireland, India, and China. Building a new, state-of-the-art bioreactor facility from scratch costs upwards of $2 billion and takes, on average, 5 years to build, test, and receive regulatory certification from the FDA. Tariffs move in months. Bioreactors take years. The idea that this threat could force a rapid relocation of the industry within a single political campaign cycle wasn't just unrealistic, it was impossible. It was a negotiating tactic that completely ignored the industrial and scientific reality on the ground. The administration had aimed a cannon at its allies, believing the sheer size of the American market gave it ultimate leverage. They assumed their friends would have no choice but to fold. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. The reaction from America's allies was not one of panic or submission. It was swift, coordinated, and devastatingly effective. They didn't just reject the threat, They unveiled a comprehensive playbook that exposed the bluff for what it was. In Canada, Health Minister Mark Holland immediately formed an emergency task force. His government didn't wait for shortages to happen. It acted preemptively, mandating that suppliers maintain a 3-month stockpile of all critical medicines. They launched a 48-hour fast-track waiver program to bypass duties in severe, life-threatening cases. But the most powerful weapon was the messaging. Holland went public with a clear, unambiguous statement. We warned you and we prepared. The political narrative was set. Any drug shortages experienced by Canadians would be the fault of Washington's reckless policies, not Ottawa's lack of preparation. Across the globe, Australia mounted a parallel defense. The U.S. is the largest buyer of Australian-made plasma products and flu vaccines. Treasurer Jim Chalmers moved instantly to reassure his citizens, reaffirming the government's ironclad commitment to its Pharmaceutical Benefit Scheme, PBS, which caps out-of-pocket costs for patients. No matter what happened with exports, Australians would not pay more for their medicine. Australia then unveiled its own 3-point plan. First, hold the PBS price line. Second, aggressively diversify exports away from the U.S. and toward new partners like India's massive Serum Institute and the EU's powerful procurement pools. Third, and most critically, coordinate a unified response with Canada, Japan, and the EU at the upcoming G20 summit. This was the checkmate move. It wasn't just one country reacting. It was a coalition of America's closest allies creating a united front. They were building legislative firewalls, stockpiling inventory, and charting new trade routes that bypassed the United States entirely. They demonstrated that the power of the U.S. market could be blunted by coordinated, intelligent resistance. They called Trump's bluff, and they did it together. The backfire was immediate and spectacular. Trump found himself trapped. The markets reacted instantly. Shares of Pfizer and Merck tumbled, while major European drug makers like Roche and AstraZeneca dragged the continent's healthcare index to a 3-year low. Investors began fleeing U.S. pharma stocks for the safety of gold and European debt. Even more damaging was the backlash at home. Within 48 hours, a bipartisan group of lawmakers, recognizing the catastrophic threat to their own constituents, introduced the Trade Review Act. This bill would strip the president of the unilateral power to impose such tariffs, requiring an independent cost-benefit analysis and a 60-day congressional vote first. Trump's attempt to strong-arm his allies had triggered a rebellion within his own government. He was now cornered. Pushing forward with the tariffs would mean knowingly inflicting massive price hikes on American voters and fighting his own party in Congress. But backing down would be a public admission that his biggest bluff had been called and defeated, leaving him looking weak and reckless on the world stage. While Canada and Australia's response was a strategic triumph, it did not come without a cost. The threat forced them into a costly and frantic process of de-risking, a corporate term for the monumental task of reorienting your entire economy away from your largest and most predictable partner. In Canada, pharmacists and hospital administrators scrambled to implement the new stockpiling mandates, a logistical nightmare that tied up capital and strained storage facilities. The government's messaging, while politically effective, created a baseline of anxiety among the public, who worried about the stability of their access to medicine. For Australia, the challenge was commercial. Finding new buyers for its highly specialized plasma and vaccine exports to replace the massive U.S. market is a difficult long-term challenge. This pivot requires building new relationships, navigating different regulatory systems in Europe and Asia, and competing in markets where they may not have the same historical advantage. The threat forced both nations to spend immense time, money, and political capital to defend against a crisis they didn't create. It fundamentally damaged the trust that underpins the global health system and accelerated their move away from economic dependence on the United States, a structural shift that will have consequences for decades to come. On the American side of the border, there was no government program to shield the public from the pain. The cost of this failed gamble was to be paid directly by its own citizens. The numbers were terrifying. For a diabetic patient, the out-of-pocket cost for insulin, already a staggering $300 to $600 a month, was projected to triple, reaching an impossible $900 to $1,800. Independent pharmacies warned that the 200% tariff would add an estimated $53 billion a year to the nation's total prescription drug bill. While Canadians and Australians were protected by their government's price controls, Americans were left completely exposed. The very people Trump claimed to be fighting for were the ones caught squarely in the crosshairs. This wasn't just about money, it was about access. The threat of tariffs created immediate uncertainty, raising the specter of life-threatening shortages of critical drugs as early as August. The great irony is that while the policy failed to create a single new manufacturing job in the short term, it succeeded brilliantly in threatening the health and financial stability of millions of American families. The pain was not shared equally. It was concentrated entirely at the American pharmacy counter. The 200% tariff bluff marked a crucial turning point. It exposed the limits of America's ability to weaponize its market and provided a clear, effective playbook for allies to resist. The global supply chain, once a symbol of cooperation, has now become a battleground. This crisis revealed that in a deeply interconnected world, no nation, not even the most powerful, can wall itself off from reality without inflicting severe wounds upon itself. The trust has been broken, and America's friends are now actively building a world that is less dependent on it. In the race to define the future, will North America win together, or will both sides lose trying to go it alone? Are you American or Canadian? Share your story and your perspective in the comments below.